Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. And if you want to learn how to support this channel and its mission to normalize atheism and deconversion, stay tuned to the end of the video. In a live stream, I was asked my opinion of the Noahide Laws. It sounded familiar, but I hadn't really done a lot of study on them. So having corrected that with a little research, today I'm presenting some basic information on the Noahide Laws, what their proposed purpose is, some of the effects that they have had on history, and an evaluation as to whether or not they are a statement of human rights or moral bondage. This video isn't so much a deep dive, but a basic report on what I discovered and an initial evaluation. The Noahide Laws are considered 7 moral principles that are said to have been given by the biblical God to all of humanity before the call of Abraham. They are considered a basic baseline of human moral obligation for all of humanity based on Genesis 1 through 11. They first appeared in the Talmud in the 1st and 2nd centuries ACE. They have had an influence on philosophical and political thought since then to the present day, influencing thoughts in the areas of universal law, human rights, natural law, and even international law. But what are they? Well, here's the list. Number 1, establish courts of justice. Number 2, prohibit idolatry. Number 3, prohibit blasphemy. Number 4, prohibit murder. Number 5, prohibit sexual immorality. Number 6, prohibit theft. Number 7, prohibit the eating a limb of a living animal. These are understood as ethical obligations to Adam and Noah and thus to all humanity. The foundation of all these is theological and rabbinic. That is why, even though they are considered supposed universal laws, you can still hear the echo of the 613 laws given to the Jews through Moses in the Pentateuch. The Old Testament law found in Genesis through Deuteronomy. While some have said this is a connection to natural law theory, some see them as a bridge between Jewish law and more universal human law, a basic ethical standard for societies that all can talk about. In one case involving my own country of the United States, this has been taken to the extent that both Congress and the President in 1991 declaring them to be the bedrock of society since the dawn of civilization, as values foundational to the United States. Now, this was a symbolic recognition and never formal law, but I have some serious objections to the moral principles of the Noahide Law versus the foundation of the Constitution, which I will get into later. Today, these laws are used as foundational to contemporary Jewish philosophy regarding universal moral standards, engaging the interfaith ethics of whether or not these laws can be even engaged with pluralistic societies, then is when a country or other society has one or more sources of cultural authority or moral principles, etc., and the coexistence of these ideologies in a single society. For my part, though, there are some obvious problems with these laws when you ask a simple question. Are these moral duties that lead to bondage, or are they actually laws that lead to human rights and freedom? I think they fail to be in the latter altogether. There are 7 laws, but I have 8 objections. Objection number 1. The Noahide Laws are not about rights. They're about duties. Bottom line, these laws impose duties on human beings. They have no guarantees for individual freedom of conscience, expression, or equality. They do not protect the individual from the government as rights do, but rather empower the state to impose laws based on divine command theory. Number 2, the Noahide Laws presuppose a specific God and a specific religious authority. No matter how much they pretend to be universal, the fact is they are founded on the God of Genesis. They follow specific authority of the rabbinic tradition, and they bind the nature of divine command to human behavior. There is no framework here that involves secular ethics, pluralistic consideration, religious freedom, or even philosophical naturalism. Objection number 3. This actually creates a hierarchical system between the Jews and non-Jews. Some of these laws still assume the 613 laws given to the Jewish people supposedly through Moses. Even if you follow these laws as a non-Jew, you're righteous, but not equal to the people of the Jews who follow the law of God more fully. Human courts being established is a great idea, but human rights require equality, and there is no equality in a system that has one standard of laws for one group and another for another. Objection number 4. These laws actually restrict religious freedom. Idolatry and blasphemy prohibition are the exact opposite of religious freedom. It's an absolute absence of rights for a person involving their choices about religion. It would criminalize Buddhism, Hinduism, paganism, atheism, etc. If it is in a monotheistic worldview, it would be illegal. Objection number 4. The Noahide Laws restrict sexual autonomy. Now, the problem here is that the Noahide Laws prohibit sexual immorality, but don't define what they mean. At this point, these so-called universal laws require a Jewish scripture definition. Adultery, certain forms of marriage, same-sex relationships, certain forms of gender expression all fail the Mosaic Law test, which would be required in order to understand the idea of sexual immorality and what the Noahide Laws demand to be defined. To enforce this law would also require a massive amount of invasion of privacy by the government. Objection 6. The punishment extreme for violation of many of these laws. Once again, you turn to the Mosaic Law, which is inherently biblical, to get what proper punishment would be for the violations of these laws. In most cases, this is capital punishment. In some cases, this seems extreme. There is no redemptive action in the Noahide Laws. It's theocratic by nature and based on an obedience-based model. Objection number 7. These laws are not universal, nor are they timeless. They were, in fact, created in a late Second Temple era of Judaism and were largely responsible for the Jews being under the empire. The idea was to define what moral obligations non-Jews had living with Jews. It's not about applying Jewish law universally. It's about applying Jewish law in relationship to non-believers after the 2nd century ACE. Objection 8. These laws depend very heavily on divine command theory. Everything about these laws depends on obedience to God, who gives divine commands. There's no consideration of them as of natural rights, social contract, etc. It is all based on the assumption that Yahweh exists and has given commands to be obeyed. But then, do these laws exist at all in Genesis 1 through 11, from which they're supposed to be based? As far as I can tell, there is no admonition creating courts in Genesis 1 through 11. There's no prohibition against idolatry, blasphemy, or theft at all. These are all based on latter laws in the Pentateuch. The only clear statement regarding the Noahide Laws is the eating of the animal with the lifeblood still flowing through it in Genesis 9 to 11. But this is in the context of humanity now being allowed to kill animals for food. Sexual immorality is solely based on the idea of one man cleaving to his wife found in Genesis 2:24, supposedly giving an early guideline to sexual behavior. But there's no prohibition against most sexual behavior, specifically in Genesis 1 through 11. And even then, we have Lamech in Genesis 4 through 19, who I would say sidesteps outside these guidelines and actually marries 2 women. Early polyamory? You be the judge, but it seems to be no objective legal standard from Yahweh about sexual behavior at all in Genesis 1 through 11. But things get even more problematic when we turn to murder. Because if you're trying to maintain there's a biblical objective morality about killing another human being, Genesis 1 through 11 doesn't support this idea at all for the most part. Genesis 9:6 does have this prohibition, but before the flood, Cain kills his brother Abel, and what is God's response? To protect Cain and say if somebody kills Cain, vengeance will be taken upon him. This idea is then reinforced by the same Lamech who took 2 lives, because he states that if Cain will be avenged, then he'll be avenged even more, Genesis 4:24. This idea is changed by Yahweh after the flood, and thus the idea is treated as subjective by Yahweh depending on changing times. Not to mention, any objective morality about taking human life goes out the window, as Yahweh himself did a genocide of the entire human race except 8 people he favored. Yahweh himself, when answering the question if it is wrong to kill a human being, seemed to answer by his actions. It depends. And this makes that idea subjective to him, and his decisions where he himself starts by defending the murderer Cain, engages in a mass murder himself because he isn't persuasive enough to get people to stop doing evil things, and then suddenly changes his mind about humans murdering other humans. This is not objective at all. So if you're wondering, what does this all have to do with real life? People don't actually consider these and act on them, right? Well, you would be wrong. In 1991, the United States Congress passed an Education Day proclamation that the Noahide Laws were the foundation of human rights and the bedrock of human society. This was an Education Day proclamation. It was not legally binding law as such, and it was signed by the president. Now, you're probably thinking this was all the Republicans, right? No, George Bush 41 was indeed the president of the time and a Republican, but Congress was heavily Democrat. It's actually an example of bipartisan agreement from the period. The Democrats passed the proclamation, and the Republican president signed it, while Law 102-14 was not the law in the classic sense, This absolutely demonstrated how, at the time, people in power so poorly understood their Constitution and its relationship to religion to be. I have to wonder if, at the time, these politicians even understood what rights in the United States Constitution are directly contradicted by the Noahide Laws. Foundationally, there's the problem with the Noahide Laws being under the direction of rabbinical authority versus being guided by a secular law interpreted by citizens. But the Noahide Laws offer no religious freedom. Idolatry, blasphemy, atheism, pluralism, all are forbidden. Freedom of speech is also strongly controlled by these laws. Blasphemy, criticism of God, religious dissent are also forbidden. They advocate for a legal system, but the legal system is based on a divine command theory and so relies on religious leadership to tell us what God supposedly said. In addition, there is capital punishment, what we consider non-harmful acts. Sexual autonomy, you might as well throw that out the window because you have none of the Noahide Laws. Because sexual immorality isn't clearly defined, you have to turn to the Mosaic Law, Jewish law, for clarification. So no adultery, no same-sex union, even private consensual acts could be restricted. There are no universal rights, only universal duties. I don't understand how these could be in any way meaningful related to the philosophical underpinnings of a free society. I also don't understand why any Congress or president can make a connection to the Noahide Laws and the foundations of the United States. But they did. It either shows how poorly educated people are about their rights or simple willful ignorance, or perhaps something else. As I look at these laws, they really have little value in the modern world that desires equality and liberty. Establishing courts is a great idea until you add the laws will be based on a divine command theory and all of its assumptions and bullshit. Laws against idolatry and blasphemy absolutely limit freedom of speech and expression, two foundational elements in liberty. Sexual morality is not defined, so a great way to remove sexual autonomy and any expression of sexuality that we don't like personally, even if it's consensual. Sure, no murder and theft is great, but I would argue these are way older than the Noahide Laws, and they are just a restatement of something else. The last law is straight up weird. No eating of a limb of a living animal. I get the idea might be the basis for animal rights, make sure animals don't suffer when they're consumed, but what the hell does this have to do with the philosophical foundation of the United States, or anything for that matter? Seems to be a filler law, like not boiling a kid in its mother's milk. So what do you think? Are the Noahide Laws good for a society and its bedrock? Or are they antithetical to human freedom? Or are they something else? Make your opinions known in the comments. Like, share, and hype this video. I would appreciate it. Also, there's probably a video recommendation right next to my head. You might want to check that out too. This also helps the channel as well. In the meantime, live your best life. You only get one go around, so make sure you give your time, money, and opportunities to yourself, the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. Have a good one, and I'll catch you next time.